My name is Nathan Walker. I'm 35 years old, and I own 5 boutique hotels across the Midwest, one of which, ironically, is the place where everything changed. I didn't build my life to impress anyone. But sometimes, fate brings people back into the halls they once told you didn't belong in, just so they can choke on their assumptions. It started with a group message from my mother. She always made announcements like they were corporate memos. This one read, "Family dinner for Dad's 70th. Looking at options. Langford Hotel seems beautiful but probably out of budget. Seth can cover most. Nathan, maybe you can help with the tip." I stared at my phone for a moment. Then I read it again. Langford Hotel. My hotel. Then the second message came in. A reply from my mother sent directly to me, not the group. "Nathan, please don't embarrass yourself. We know you've been trying, but this is a high-end place. Let's be realistic." I don't know what hit me harder, the words themselves, or how familiar they felt. She laughed. Not a laughing emoji. Not a ha-ha. She actually wrote, "You're sweet to offer to pay, Nathan. But let the adults handle this. Let the adults handle this." Let that sink in. I'm the eldest child. I was the one who moved out first. Paid my own tuition. Took out loans no one helped me repay. And here I was being told by my own mother at 35 that I wasn't adult enough to chip in for dinner. A dinner. Hosted at a hotel I designed, renovated, and now own entirely. They didn't know that, of course. They didn't know anything about my life, not because I kept it a secret, but because no one ever asked. I could have told them right then. Could have said, "Actually, I'll comp the entire night because I own the damn building." But I didn't. Instead, I just replied, "I'll take care of it." 3 words. Neutral. Clean. No punctuation to give away emotion. The kind of reply that gives people room to underestimate you a little longer. The kind of reply that lets karma pick its own timing. And it did. Because 2 weeks later, when my family walked through the marble entrance of Langford, complimenting the chandeliers, pretending they belonged there, one of the valets nodded at me and said, "Good evening, Mr. Walker. Everything is ready in the Winston suite." My mother turned, and the look in her eyes told me that for the first time in her life, she was the one who felt small. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it really started, before the suits, before the silence, before I learned the most powerful revenge isn't screaming at the people who doubted you. It's watching them choke on their assumptions in the place they thought you could never afford to enter. My mother has always had a very particular smile. It's not the kind that reaches her eyes. It's the kind she uses when she's too polite to roll them. That smile was the first response I got the day I told her I wanted to work in hospitality. I was 17. It was a Saturday morning, and she was folding linens in the dining room, pressed white tablecloths she'd saved from a church rummage sale. I walked in with a folder in my hand, and a nervous kind of pride in my chest. "Mom," I said, "I've been researching hotel management programs. There's this one in Denver that offers a dual degree in design and operations." She looked up. That smile. "Oh, Nathan," she said, "you want to be a hotel manager?" I nodded. I was young, but I knew what I wanted. I'd always loved the idea of spaces that made people feel something safe, welcome, important. She set down the linen, smoothed a crease with her knuckle, and chuckled. Not cruelly, not loudly, just enough to sting. "Honey," she said, "that's cute. But let's be realistic. You're good at numbers. Why don't you think about accounting or finance? You could work with your dad. Hotels are for people who don't have a plan." That sentence never left me. Hotels are for people who don't have a plan. It became a quiet refrain in my life, a phrase I'd hear in my head every time I filled out another financial aid form, took another night shift at the front desk, or skipped lunch to buy software so I could teach myself AutoCAD. What she didn't understand, what she never cared to ask, was that I didn't want to just run a hotel. I wanted to design one from the ground up. I wanted to study how a lobby could quiet anxiety, how lighting could make people feel seen, how a room could feel like a second chance, not just a second night. But to her, and to most of my family, hospitality wasn't a career. It was a fallback, a side door for people who weren't smart enough to use the front. And so I stopped talking about it. I still chased it. I just did it quietly. While Seth was posting photos of his corporate retreat in Aspen, I was retiling a bathroom at a 3-star motel and sketching ideas on the back of receipts. There's a moment when you realize you're not just being doubted, you're being erased. That moment for me happened over brunch 3 years later. Seth had just accepted a job at a law firm in New York. Mom raised her glass and toasted to his vision and ambition. Then she turned to me and said, "And Nathan's still working the front desk. He always has such a warm smile for the guests." She meant it as praise. I heard it as a burial. That same smile crossed her face last week when I offered to pay for Dad's birthday dinner. That same half laugh, half dismissal. Like I was still 17, still folding my own dreams into someone else's idea of acceptable. She had no idea that the place she deemed out of budget was built brick by brick on every hour I worked while she laughed. And she's about to walk into it, thinking she's a guest, when she's really the punchline. After I read her message, I didn't respond right away. I put the phone down, let it face the ceiling, let the silence settle into the room like dust. The apartment was quiet, as it always is at that hour. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the muted light from the street lamp outside filtering through the blinds. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. This was one of those times. I reached for my laptop out of habit more than intention and clicked into an old email folder labeled Home. It's not a place I visit often, but tonight it pulled at me like a thread I hadn't realized was still loose. The first message was dated May 17th, 11 years ago. Subject line: Your brother's internship. Mom had forwarded me a press release from Seth's firm. It announced a prestigious internship in their New York office. She highlighted his name in yellow, added a single line of commentary so proud. This is how careers are built. No mention of the fact that 2 weeks earlier, I'd sent her an email of my own, saying I'd gotten my first full-time offer from a boutique hotel in Denver. I remember spending hours writing that message, trying to make it sound official, but hopeful. I ended it with, "I know it's not Wall Street, but it feels right." She never replied. I scrolled further. Another email 3 years ago. I had just launched my first solo project, an interior redesign for a small lodge in Milwaukee. I'd attached before and after photos, poured my excitement into every line. Her reply: "Hope you're getting enough rest." Seth says New York is exhausting. The contrast was clinical, like she had a son and a hobbyist. I closed the laptop, not in anger, just enough. I'd learned a long time ago not to expect celebration from people who only recognize one kind of success. But tonight felt different. Not because it hurt more, but because it hurt less. The ache had dulled into something sharper, cleaner, a quiet clarity. She thought she was making a joke when she said I could help with the tip, but all she did was tip the first domino. And now I could feel the sequence unfolding. The dining room, the wine selection, the chef's notes, every detail already arranged. And when the time came, she'd walk through the grand arched entry of the Langford high heels, tapping polished marble head held like she owned the place. She wouldn't know. Not at first. Not until the staff greeted me by name. Not until she realized who'd been paying the bills she assumed were too high for me to understand. And in that moment, she'd finally see the answer to a question she never asked. What happens to the boy you laughed at when he said he'd build something beautiful? He does, silently, deliberately, until the day it's big enough for you to choke on. I was 16 the first time I put on a bow tie for money. It was rented. One size too tight. Matched with a white button-down shirt I borrowed from my dad's closet. The sleeves were long enough to cover half my hands, but no one cared. I was just background. The job was simple. Refill water, clear plates, smile. The wedding was at the Glenwood Country Club. White linens, gold trim. The kind of place my mother used to drive past slowly, just to see what they've done with the hedges this year. I'd found the gig through a classmate whose cousin ran catering staff. $25 for the night. I thought I was rich. Somewhere around hour 3, as I carried a tray of champagne flutes toward the dance floor, I heard my name. Nathan, I turned, and there they were. My mother and Seth. I hadn't seen them when the guests arrived. Apparently, Dad's co-worker's daughter was the bride. Mom was in one of her silk evening sets, the kind she only wore when there were people of consequence around. Seth, 2 years younger than me but already taller, had that familiar smirk I'd come to associate with danger. He squinted at me, then laughed. "You working here?" he asked, voice high with disbelief. Mom chimed in, chuckling as if this were cute. "Oh, honey, you didn't tell us you were doing this." I smiled, automatic. Forced. "It's just a part-time thing," I said. "Good experience." Seth leaned in, stage whispered. "What kind of experience?" Folding napkins. Mom didn't correct him. She just sipped her wine and gave me that smile again. The one with no warmth. "Well," she said, "at least you'll know how to serve people if this whole hotel thing doesn't work out." I don't remember what I said next. I just remember the weight of the tray in my hand suddenly doubling. The glasses clinking with a tremble I couldn't control. The feeling of my bow tie tightening like it was mocking me. After that night, I stopped telling them when I picked up shifts. Stopped mentioning jobs. Stopped inviting them to see the places I worked. It was easier to let them believe I was drifting than to explain I was learning. I wasn't folding napkins. I was studying people, movement, space, timing. While they danced under chandeliers, I was watching how the room changed when the music shifted. I was learning how light made food taste better, how scent could disarm ego. They saw a waiter. I saw a blueprint. And quietly, I started building. Senior year of high school, every dinner conversation revolved around college. Seth had already committed to Penn full-ride early decision. My parents had printed out the acceptance letter and pinned it on the fridge like it was a family crest. Me, I waited until March to tell them my choice. It was a small program, a university in Colorado, with a dual focus on hospitality design and environmental psychology. I'd spent 3 months researching it, talking to alumni, even emailing a professor who responded with, "You think about space like someone who's already seen the inside of a blueprint." That line stuck with me. It felt like the first time someone described me without needing to subtract anything. So one evening, I waited until after dinner, after the dishes were washed, and Dad was halfway through his crossword, and I said, "I've decided. I'm going to Riverstone University. Hospitality and Design program." There was a silence. Not a dramatic one, just dismissive. The kind where you can already hear the judgment forming before anyone says a word. Mom didn't look up from folding laundry. "Riverstone. That's not a real school." Dad frowned. "Hospitality and design, is that like decorating?" "No," I said, steadying my voice. "It's about how environments affect behavior, how spaces influence emotion. I want to design hotels that actually help people feel better. Like emotionally better." Mom snorted. "So, therapy with wallpaper." Seth didn't say anything, just kept scrolling on his phone. Dad leaned forward, laced his fingers, and delivered it like a verdict. "We're not funding that. If you want to play around with pillows and candles, you can do it on your own dime." I nodded, quietly, not because I agreed, but because I knew resistance only gave them more room to patronize me. That night, I took down the college brochures I'd taped to my wall. Not out of shame, just practicality. There was no room for daydreaming anymore. I applied for financial aid, took out federal loans, said yes to every work-study program they offered. And then I got a job. Actually, 3. Mornings I worked front desk at a motel off I-80. Afternoons I attended lectures and design labs. Evenings I bussed tables at a restaurant that played soft jazz and served $30 on trays I couldn't afford to eat. Every night I collapsed into bed, with my sketchbook still open on my chest. No one asked how school was going. No one sent care packages. No one visited. And that was okay. Because one day, I told myself, they'd step into a room I'd created, feel the calm, the beauty, the deliberate stillness, and never know why it made them feel safe. But I would. Because it came from the exact silence they left me in. There's a rhythm to working 3 jobs that doesn't leave much room for reflection. You wake before the sun, lace up the same pair of shoes until the soles feel like part of your skin, and move through each shift like it's choreography you've memorized without music. Weekdays started at the front desk of the Garden View Motel, a 2-star place with a broken coffee machine and carpet that hadn't been updated since the 90s. But it was quiet in the mornings, and the guests were mostly long-haul drivers or construction crews who just wanted keys, towels, and silence. By 11:30, I'd clock out, grab a protein bar from the vending machine, and head to campus. Classes in lighting theory, spatial acoustics, sustainable materials. I took notes like my rent depended on them because, in a way, it did. After class, I'd switch shirts in the campus restroom, then bike 5 miles downtown to Maison Renard, a restaurant that liked to call itself casual fine dining, whatever that meant. All I knew was I wasn't allowed to wear sneakers, and the napkins had to be folded diagonally. There was a moment every night, usually around 9:45 p.m., when I'd be scraping creme brulee off dessert plates, and someone would say, "You always look so calm. You must love this job." I'd just smile. Because it wasn't about love. It was about survival. Not in the tragic cinematic sense, just the practical kind. Rent was due on the 1st. My meal plan covered lunch, not dinner. Books weren't cheap, and I didn't have a safety net waiting at home. But here's the thing. No one tells you. When you're tired enough, your ego goes quiet. I wasn't above wiping fingerprints off wine glasses. I wasn't too proud to clean a toilet if it paid $15 an hour. Because every hour bought me a little more distance from the voice in my head that still sounded like my mother, saying, "Let the adults handle this." I wasn't waiting for approval. I was building muscle memory, for pressure, for discipline, for showing up even when no one clapped. Those nights taught me more about space and energy than any textbook ever could. How lighting affects how long guests linger, how noise makes people tip less, how scent can change the way you remember a place. I wasn't just working, I was studying. And quietly, I was preparing to design a world none of them believed I could ever belong in. The last time I shared good news with my family, I really thought it would land. I'd just finished my 2nd semester, and one of my professors had nominated me for a summer design fellowship. It wasn't paid, but it was selective. Only 5 students across the country were chosen that year. We'd get to shadow real hospitality, architects help with concept planning for a new wellness resort in Oregon. For me, it felt like a sign that I wasn't crazy, that I was on the right path even if no one else saw it. I called my mom that night, first time in weeks. She picked up after 2 rings, distracted rustling papers in the background. "Hey, I said I've got some good news. Is Seth okay? She asked. Yeah, this is about me, I laughed, trying to sound light. I got into a summer fellowship program. It's for hospitality design. I'll be working with real architects on a new property. They only took 5 people. There was a pause. Then she said, Is it paid? I hesitated. No. But it's prestigious. The exposure she cut in. Nathan, you really need to focus on stable options. You're not a kid anymore. You can't just chase dreams forever. I didn't argue, didn't defend it, didn't even finish the story about how the lead architect had complimented my portfolio. I just said, yeah, you're right, and let her go. After that, I stopped calling. Not out of spite, not even disappointment. It just became clear that I was speaking a language no one in that house was ever going to bother learning. I didn't need applause, but I also didn't need silence that felt like shame. So I took my victories with me quietly, privately, and I learned how to build a life that didn't require translation. The night shift at the Garden View wasn't glamorous. 12 to 8. No room service, no valet, no housekeeping after midnight. Just me, the front desk, a pot of stale coffee, and whatever wandered in off the highway. But those were the hours that taught me the most. See, when you work nights at a 2-star motel, you don't meet people at their best. You meet them in transition, between jobs, between cities, between breakdowns. Some guests came in angry, snapping at me before I'd even said hello. Others came in silent eyes, hollow from too much road and not enough sleep. I started noticing the way my coworkers handled them. Jorge, the overnight custodian, barely spoke English, but he could calm down the loudest guests with a look and a slow nod. No fear, no ego, just stillness. Marcy, the shift before mine, kept packs of instant oatmeal in her drawer. She'd slip one to single moms checking in with toddlers past bedtime, say it was extra from the lobby stock. None of it was in the employee handbook, but all of it mattered. One night around 2 a.m., a man came in soaking wet. No reservation, no luggage, just car keys in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. He didn't say much, just held out a credit card and whispered, "Please." I gave him a key. 3rd floor, end of the hall, extra towels. As he walked away, I watched him slow down just before the elevator. Like for the first time all day he could. That's when it clicked. Hotels aren't just beds and locks. They're thresholds. They're the space between where you've been and where you're going. And how that space makes you feel changes everything. It wasn't about chandeliers or thread counts. It was about the invisible thing's tone of voice, timing the right kind of silence. That's what I wanted to design. Not buildings. Moments. The kind that remind people they still have dignity, even if they've been driving for 9 hours in the rain. Even if the world outside sees them as noise. The Garden View wasn't much, but in its own way it was a classroom, and I was learning how to build kindness into concrete. One graveyard shift at a time. I met Samir at a design symposium in Milwaukee. I'd shown up late, coffee-stained shirt, a stack of sketches barely held together by binder clips. Everyone else wore pressed blazers and handed out embossed business cards. I didn't even have a portfolio case, just a repurposed pizza box wrapped in butcher paper. After the panel, while most people flocked to the keynote speaker, I wandered into a side room where a quieter presentation was happening, emotional architecture in transitional spaces. That's where I found Samir. He was sitting alone, scribbling diagrams on a notepad with no logo. I sat next to him because there was nowhere else to sit. 10 minutes in, the speaker said something about how lighting and scent can accelerate trust in unfamiliar environments. Samir let out a quiet, and I nodded just enough that he noticed. Afterward, he turned to me and asked, "You believe all that stuff?" About architecture changing emotions, I looked at him and said, "I've seen it. In cheap motels and quiet lobbies at 3 a.m. He smiled. "We should talk." Turned out Samir had once been a systems engineer, MIT grad, six-figure job, the works. But after a health scare and a burnout spiral that no one at his company noticed, he walked away. Just walked. He started studying architecture in his late 20s, not to build towers, but to explore something he called adaptive calm. That night we sat in a diner until they turned off the coffee machine, talked about thermal textures, transition lighting, lobby acoustics tuned for nervous hearts. But it wasn't all theory. We talked about our families too. He told me his uncle once said, "Real men don't decorate buildings, they own them." I told him about my mother's laugh, the one she saved for things I took seriously. That was the beginning. Over the next year, we started sketching what we called recovery hotels. Not hospitals, not spas, not luxury escapes, but spaces built to restore identity after failure, heartbreak, collapse. Places where a person could walk in, broken, and walk out with at least a name again. We knew we wouldn't be funded by the big chains. We knew it sounded too soft for investors. But we didn't care, because we weren't designing for investors. We were designing for the man who checks in with nothing but a grocery bag, for the woman who's Googled places that don't feel like shame, for ourselves. Because healing isn't loud, and it's never flashy. It's quiet, intentional, often unnoticed, kind of like the people who build it. I wasn't planning to buy a building that day. I was just passing through. A rainy Tuesday in late March, the kind of day where everything looks a little gray, and you start questioning the timing of your entire life. I'd taken the wrong exit off I-94, or maybe it was the right one. That's when I saw it, Langford Hotel, or at least what was left of it. The sign was half-lit letters flickering like a dying apology. The brickwork cracked vines curling up the corners, like nature trying to take it back. But something about it stopped me. I pulled over, got out, walked the perimeter. No one else was there, just the sound of my footsteps and the faint hum of traffic blocks away. I pressed my hand against the front door, glass smeared with dust and time. Through it I could see the lobby, faded checkerboard floor, a chandelier missing half its bulbs. Front desk crooked like it had been leaned on too many times by people with too much baggage. It was beautiful. Not in the way that sells postcards, but in the way old people's hands are beautiful, creased, worn, purposeful. I found the property listing online that night. It had been sitting unsold for 16 months, bank-owned, deemed non-viable for competitive redevelopment. Translation, no one saw value in it, which made it perfect, because I didn't want a blank slate. I wanted something that had already held thousands of untold stories, something that had survived being overlooked. Samir thought I was out of my mind. This place has no elevators that work asbestos in the walls, and it smells like a rotting ledger. I nodded, and he sighed. "You're already in love with it, aren't you, Oz?" I didn't know how I'd fund it yet, didn't know who would stay there, didn't even know if I could get the permits to bring it up to code. But I knew how I felt standing in front of it. I felt seen, like this broken place understood what it meant to be dismissed, and still be standing. So I made the call, started the paperwork, and just like that, the boy who once folded napkins in silence now owned the kind of place his mother said was too expensive to enter. It was fitting, because Langford didn't need to be shiny, it needed to be honest. And so did I. Rebuilding Langford wasn't a project, it was a ritual. Every day I showed up before the crews, hard hat thermos rolled up floor plans under my arm. We didn't demo everything. I didn't want new. I wanted memory. So we sanded the original floors until the oak came back like breath after drowning. We kept the staircase curve even though straight lines were cheaper. We replaced the chandelier bulbs one by one, not with LEDs, but with warm incandescents, that made the ceiling glow like dusk. I hand-picked the scent diffuser's cedar and orange peel because they reminded me of the motel lobby where I used to clock in at 5 a.m. The wallpaper in the Winston suite was printed with an abstract pattern I'd sketched on a napkin during my third job. No one knew that, but me. Samir once asked why I was so obsessed with the details. I said, because the details are the only things that ever noticed me. Most of the work went unnoticed by others. And that was the point. We weren't building a spectacle. We were building a haven, a place where silence didn't feel like judgment, where dim lights meant softness, not secrecy. I'd walk the hallways at night alone, testing the sound of my own footsteps on different carpets. I'd sit in the lobby chairs for hours, making sure they hugged your spine just right. I even paid extra to have the front desk lowered 2 inches, just enough so no guest ever had to crane their neck to be seen. I didn't post about it, didn't brag. I just worked. Because this wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving that someone like me, someone they dismissed, someone they laughed at, could build something that didn't just stand, but welcomed. Langford wasn't mine because I bought it. It was mine because I poured every overlooked part of myself into it. And finally, that part had a place to live. I approached the dinner the way I would a soft opening. Controlled, precise, measured to the inch. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth served room temperature with a side of quiet clarity. I started by calling Jackson my general manager at Langford. Loyal, exacting, former Marine, the kind of man who pressed his uniform with military starch, even though we wore tailored suits now. Jackson, I said, I need to book the Winston suite for a private event. My family. They don't know who I am to this place. Let's keep it that way. Until I decide otherwise. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Got it. VIP treatment, but subtle. No, I said. Not subtle. Elegant. Effortless. Let it feel like the standard. We curated the menu down to texture. My father had always loved braised short ribs, tender fall off the bone, but hated foam and unnecessary garnish. So we went classic hand-cut potatoes, herb juice, roasted vegetables that still had snap. For wine, I opened a bottle from my personal cellar, a 1962 Bordeaux he once talked about when I was 15, during a dinner we weren't invited to. He never thought I remembered. I remembered everything. The jazz trio in the corner would play live, but only instrumental. Nothing too nostalgic. I didn't want the night coated in sentimentality. Just tone. I instructed Elise, our executive chef, to greet the table briefly after appetizers. She'd mention offhand that the owner was particularly fond of this vintage. A breadcrumb. Nothing more. As for the room, I made sure the lighting shifted slowly through the night, cool white at the start, warming to golden amber as dessert approached. Lighting is emotion. Most people don't notice it, but they feel it. They remember how a place made them feel, even if they forget the color of the walls. I arranged place cards with soft calligraphy. No assigned seats, but just enough structure to show intention. I even made sure the napkins were the same style my mother used to fold at church events. She never knew I noticed, but I always did. This wasn't a performance. It was a restoration. One night under one roof, for them to see the version of me they never bothered to look for. No grand gestures, no mic drops. Just me behind every choice, every taste, every shadow, inviting them into a world they said I'd never be part of. They'd sit surrounded by proof I didn't know them, proof I made anyway. I waited until 10:07 p.m. to call Jackson. He always ended his rounds at 10, logged his notes, then poured exactly 2 fingers of bourbon in the staff lounge before heading out. I didn't want to interrupt that rhythm, but tonight I needed precision. He picked up on the second ring. Mr. Walker, No need for that, I said. Not tonight. Just Nathan is fine. Understood, he replied. Then, after a pause, is this about the Thompson party? It is, he exhaled slowly. How much do they know? Nothing, I said. They think it's a favor. A discount I called in from someone I used to work with. Brutal. No, I said. Expected. I pulled out my notepad, flipped to the page I'd been scribbling on for 2 days. Everything was underlined twice. Let's start with the menu, I said. Jackson clicked his pen on the other end. Ready. First course, wild mushroom bisque. No truffle oil. My mother thinks it's pretentious. Understood. Second, pan-seared halibut with lemon beurre blanc. But only for her. She doesn't eat red meat. And the rest, braised short rib. Bone in. Carrots cut thick, not shaved. My father hates when they feel fancy. Give him a steak knife anyway, even though he won't need it. I paused. Elise will need to slow roast it for 7 hours. Not 6. I want the meat to fall apart before the fork lands. Copy that. For dessert, bourbon caramel cake. No chocolate, no nuts, no powdered sugar. Just rich, warm, clean. Got it, Jackson said. Wine, I looked at the bottle on my desk. The label had faded over time, but the cork was intact. A 1962 Bordeaux. My father once spoke of it like a fable. He'd never tasted it, just remembered it from a wine magazine he used to read in secret, back when bills made indulgence a luxury of thought, not practice. Decant the Bordeaux 4 hours before dinner. Serve it just before the entree. You're pulling from your personal cellar? Yes. And your mother, sparkling water. Lime wedge. Left side of the glass. Always the left. I could hear Jackson smiling now. This is surgical, he said. It has to be. Because this wasn't just a dinner. It was a message. Written in temperature-texture tannins. Every flavor was deliberate. Every detail chosen by the boy they once dismissed as unrealistic. Now he was feeding them respect with the precision they never thought he was capable of. And they would taste every bit of it. Quietly. Elegantly. Without ever knowing who set the table. I sat alone in my office. Lights dimmed, the city stretching silent outside the window. The blueprint for the dinner sat in front of me, flat, precise, clinical. Guest list printed. Seating alignment adjusted for flow. Menu cards reviewed. Lighting cues scheduled by the hour. Every detail where it needed to be. Except me. It's a strange thing planning a celebration for people who don't know they're walking into your world. Stranger still when those people are your blood. Part of me wanted to delete the whole thing. Cancel the reservation. Let them go to some chain steakhouse, split the bill, and forget I ever offered. But another part, quieter, steadier, held my hand in place. This wasn't about them. Not really. It was about standing in the space they told me I didn't belong in, and realizing I didn't need their permission to be there. Still, the conflict sat heavy in my chest. Not anger. I'd worked through that years ago. Not revenge. That was too easy. What I felt was something harder to name, grief maybe, for the versions of me that once waited by the phone. The boy who thought one day they'd say, "We see you. We're proud." He died quietly, somewhere between shift number 60 and rejection number 7. What's left of me is older, sharper, but still human enough to feel the weight of what this dinner really meant. It wasn't just an unveiling, it was a funeral. Not for them. For the last pieces of me that still needed their applause. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the map of the Winston suite. It looked like a stage. And in a way it was. But I wasn't stepping on it to perform. I was watching from the rafters, making sure the cues landed, the lights faded at the right tempo, and the guests felt what I needed them to feel even if they never learned who wrote the script. Samir had once asked me why I cared so much about crafting experiences for people who didn't care about me. I didn't have an answer then, but I do now, because sometimes the best way to heal from being invisible is to create something no one can ignore and make it beautiful, even if they never know who to thank. I watched them arrive from the control room 3 floors above the lobby behind tinted glass next to the AV rack. Mom entered first, as I knew she would, always early, always scanning. Her heels clicked across the marble like they owned the place. She wore navy crepe pearls, and that same expression she wore to every country club fundraiser, half pleasant, half evaluating. She looked around the lobby with faint approval, then squinted at the floral arrangements. "They've used ranunculus," she said to no one in particular. "Very in right now." Seth followed behind, phone in hand, not looking up. His tie was slightly askew, probably intentional, part of the effortless lawyer aesthetic. He was talking to someone, probably Derek, or one of the guys from his firm. "Yeah, some hotel downtown. Supposed to be classy," he muttered. "No idea how Nate got us a table here. Must have begged someone." I flinched a little at that one, not because it hurt, because of how automatic it was. That was the narrative. Has always been the narrative. Nate begs. Seth builds. I watched as the hostess greeted them with a smile so polished it could cut glass. "Good evening. Welcome to Langford." Mom nodded curtly. "We're the Thompson party. Private room." Of course, the hostess replied. "You're in the Winston suite. May I take your coats?" Mom hesitated, then said, "Let's wait until the others arrive. My eldest might be running late." She said might like she meant always. Seth smirked. He probably got lost trying to find parking. "Or decided not to come," Mom added, checking her watch. "He has a habit of that. I'd told them I'd be there. I even confirmed the time. But here they were, already crafting the story, where I flaked, faded, failed. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I watched as they walked to the lounge area, sinking into armchairs I'd picked out myself, upholstered in charcoal herringbone, with just the right lumbar curve. Seth took a photo for Instagram. No credit to the designer. No mention of the space. Just the caption, "Dinner with the fam." Big birthday vibes. He tagged my mother. Not me. I leaned closer to the monitor. Mom was adjusting a linen napkin. She turned to Seth and said, "At least it looks nice. For the price, it better be." Seth laughed. I didn't. Not because I was angry. Because I realized in that moment they still believed this place, this space, this night belonged to someone else. And that made what was coming next even more satisfying. They were guests in my house, and they didn't even know it. Yet. I didn't take the private elevator that night. I walked around the block first, let the cold air clear my head, let my shoes touch the same sidewalk as everyone else. Then I stepped through the main entrance of Langford like any other guest. My hotel. My name on the deed. My fingerprints in every stitch of leather and line of crown molding. But to them, to everyone in that lobby, I was just another man in a suit. And for a few more minutes, I needed it to stay that way. The double doors opened with a gentle hydraulic hush. The lobby light was warm, just as I'd planned. Soft jazz hummed from the hidden speakers, and the scent of cedar and orange peel lingered in the air like memory. Immediately, the front desk staff stood taller. Carla was on shift, poised, efficient, loyal. She glanced up, registered my face, and without hesitation said, "Good evening, Mr. Walker." "Welcome." Not loud, not for show, just enough for anyone nearby to hear. Her eyes didn't widen. Her posture didn't change. She knew the plan. I gave her a nod, minimal professional, and kept walking. On my left, Jonah from Concierge gave a small bow. "Everything's on schedule, sir," he murmured as I passed. Every step felt like a quiet drumbeat under my skin. Ahead, I could see my family through the archway into the lounge. Seth was scrolling his phone again. Mom was mid-gesture, probably critiquing the centerpiece. They didn't see me. Not yet. But the staff did. And they greeted me like what I was, not a guest, not a favor. The architect, the builder, the one who had taken a skeleton of a building and given it a soul. As I approached one of the valets, Peter, new maybe 6 weeks in, moved instinctively to open the dining room door for me. He paused, looked at me and said, "It's an honor to meet you, sir. I've heard how much of yourself you put into this place." I smiled, not for pride, but for the sheer contrast of it. This kid, 19, polite, nervous, saw me more clearly than my own mother ever had. I straightened my cuffs, felt the crisp weight of the cufflinks Samir had given me when we opened Langford. Then I stepped forward. Not fast, not theatrical, just ready. I wasn't there to be noticed. I was there to be undeniable. I took 3 more steps before it happened. Jackson appeared from the side hallway, crisp in his tailored black suit posture, straight as a ruler. His timing perfect as always. He didn't glance at my mother. He didn't acknowledge Seth. He looked directly at me like I was the only person in the room. And then, with the calm clarity of someone stating fact, not opinion, he gave a small bow and said, "Mr. Walker, the Winston suite is prepared, just as you requested." Silence followed. Not just from my family, from the room. I heard it. That moment of air pulling back into itself. The break in conversation from 2 guests near the fireplace. The pause in the jazz piano just long enough to be noticed. My mother turned first. Slowly. Deliberately. She looked from Jackson to me, then back again. I met her eyes. Said nothing. Seth frowned. "Wait, what did he call you?" I didn't respond. Jackson stepped aside, gesturing toward the double doors with open-palmed grace. "The chef has decanted the 1962 Bordeaux. Your father's favorite, I believe." That line hit her harder than my name. Her lips parted. She looked at me like I was a stranger who had stolen her son's face and made it formidable. "That bottle was from your collection?" she asked. I nodded. "I didn't know you had a wine cellar," she said, voice smaller now. "You've never asked." That was all I said. Seth took a step forward, blinking fast, like he was trying to process code in a language he never thought I'd learn. "Hold on," he muttered. "You're the... what?" The manager, Jackson, cleared his throat politely. "Mr. Walker is the owner of the Langford and several other properties in the region." My mother's knees bent just slightly. The sound of her pearl bracelet shifting was the only thing breaking the stillness. I didn't gloat, didn't smile. I just let the truth stand, clean, upright, in full light. There was no need to humiliate them. They'd already written the script for that. I had simply provided the stage. Neither of them moved, not right away. My mother stood frozen, one hand still resting on the back of the velvet lounge chair, the other hanging awkwardly at her side. Her mouth opened once, then closed again, like she'd run out of language. Seth just stared, not with anger, not even embarrassment, just confusion, as if the universe had flipped without notifying him. I didn't stop. I didn't offer comfort or explanation. I stepped forward quietly, calmly through the space between them. The same space they used to fill with dismissive smiles and quiet corrections. The space where their version of me used to stand. This time, I passed through it untouched. No resistance, no approval, no need. Jackson opened the doors to the Winston suite. Soft lighting spilled out onto the hallway floor, golden, warm, intentional. I turned slightly, just enough to say, "Shall we?" It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. To walk into truth, to see me clearly. Whether they followed, that was up to them. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one waiting. I wasn't the one proving, performing, or pleading to be let in. I was already home. And they were just beginning to understand where the door really was. We sat at the table like strangers who'd all worn the same last name by accident. The Winston suite was glowing candlelight, dancing on crystal soft jazz, humming low in the corners, the scent of thyme and roasted shallots drifting through the air like a promise. But the silence between us was louder than any ambiance. My father, seated at the head of the table, looked cautiously pleased, like someone who'd arrived at a party he didn't fully remember agreeing to attend. He cleared his throat twice, but didn't speak. Seth was on his second glass of wine already. He kept glancing at his phone under the table, pretending not to, as if the screen offered a simpler world where I didn't exist. And my mother, she sat upright, spine rigid, napkin folded into a perfect triangle in her lap. She hadn't looked me in the eye since we entered the room. Instead, she focused on everything else. "The silverware is heavier than necessary," she said at one point, running a finger along the edge of the knife. "But elegant, I suppose." When the amuse-bouche was served parsnip puree with a delicate crisp of sage, she murmured, "Very conceptual." Seth snorted into his wine glass. No one asked me about the space. No one asked about the wine or the music, or how any of this came to be. It was as if by acknowledging it, they'd have to admit they'd misread an entire person for decades. And that was far too heavy to lift over dinner. I didn't push. I ate slowly. I listened. To forks clicking too precisely. To glasses setting down a little too hard. To compliments directed at no one to avoid directing them at me. The staff moved like clockwork, trained, smooth, reverent. Every dish was timed, every pour extra. But to my family, it was just a nice restaurant, not the culmination of everything they once told me I wasn't capable of. I watched my mother compliment the plating like it had nothing to do with me. I watched Seth scroll LinkedIn while dessert menus were passed out, and I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't hurt. Not really, because I wasn't hungry for their validation anymore. What I was tasting beneath the wine, beneath the roasted fennel, was freedom, the kind that comes not from proving them wrong, but from no longer needing them to be right. It was after the second course, just as the lamb was being cleared, and the room had sunk into that post-meal quiet, the kind where people loosen their grip on performance and start to say what they actually mean. Seth set down his wine glass, not rushed, not angry. He just looked at me and asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" His voice wasn't accusatory. It was stunned. The way someone sounds when they realize they've been standing on the wrong side of a mirror for years. I looked at him, not with hostility, just presence. "I didn't hide it," I said. He frowned. "Come on." "No," I said gently. "I didn't hide it. I just stopped explaining." Mom shifted in her seat. Dad watched me but said nothing. Seth leaned in elbows on the table now. But this he said. "This place. The Langford owning a hotel, hella brand, and you didn't think to share that I set down my fork carefully. I did. Once. Years ago. I told Mom I got promoted at the Denver property, and she changed the subject to your new apartment. I told Dad I was starting a consulting group, and he asked if I had a backup plan. He blinked. That part he didn't remember. I went on. I sent progress updates for a while, photos, texts. I tried, but the responses were always thin, uncomfortable, or just ignored. I shrugged, not bitterly, just stating the record. Eventually, I realized I was interrupting the version of me you all preferred, quiet, struggling, small. So I stopped interrupting. Seth looked down, played with his napkin, then said, "But you still came tonight." I did. He looked up. Eyes narrowed. Why, it was a fair question. I thought about it before I answered. Because it's Dad's birthday, I said. And because I wanted you to see me, not out of spite, not for applause, just once without your assumptions in the way. Seth didn't reply right away. My mother still hadn't looked at me directly. But my father, he nodded, just once. Small, like he was agreeing with something he hadn't fully let himself admit until now. And for that moment, it was enough. Dessert had just been cleared when I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the small envelope. Thick cream stock. Handwritten name in dark blue ink, Elaine. My mother looked at it like it might contain a bill. Or, worse, an apology. I placed it beside her water glass without a word. She didn't touch it at first. Seth raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" I didn't answer him. I waited. Eventually, she slid one finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of stationery and a receipt framed elegantly in a silver linen backing. Her eyes scanned the paper, then scanned it again. She looked up, then down, then froze. It was the invoice for the floral subscription she'd received for the last 2 years. The one that arrived every first Thursday of the month, always seasonal, always elegant, always anonymous. She used to joke that it must have been a clerical error from the church, or some friend with too much taste and not enough credit. She'd never asked where they came from, and I'd never told her. Until now. Her lips parted slightly. No sound came out. I spoke quietly. "I remembered you once said fresh flowers make a house feel less lonely. You said it when Dad was traveling more. You probably forgot." She didn't deny it. I reached into my jacket again, placing 2 more slips on the table. One was a tuition deposit receipt for the music camp Seth's daughter had attended last summer, when he told us a generous donor stepped in after a scholarship fell through. The other was a confirmation of the physical therapy sessions Dad took last year, back when his insurance lapsed for a few months, and no one knew how they were covered. All under a private LLC. All paid through channels I kept silent. All me. Mom's hands trembled slightly now. She opened her mouth again, then closed it. There was no air left for performance. "You," she whispered. But the sentence never finished. I didn't need it to. I never wanted credit, I said calmly. I just didn't want silence to be the only thing I ever left behind. Seth looked stunned. Dad looked at me like he was seeing a second son he didn't know he had. But Mom, she just sat there. Still. Small. And for the first time I could remember, quiet, in a way that wasn't dismissive, but disarmed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't proud. She was simply confronted by truth and by a kindness she never thought to ask for. She came back the next morning. I wasn't told ahead of time, didn't need to be. Carla texted me at 8:03 a.m., short and professional the way we'd trained for unexpected guests. Elaine Thompson at front desk. No appointment. Requesting to speak with you. I didn't reply. I just watched from the office feed camera, 4A lobby angle mid-frame. There she stood. Same heels, different coat, clutching her bag like it might give her purpose. Carla, ever graceful, leaned in with her standard smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Do you have an appointment with Mr. Walker?" The words hit her like static. She blinked once. "I'm his mother." Carla didn't flinch. "I understand. But Mr. Walker's schedule is currently full. I can check with his assistant if you'd like to request a meeting." A pause. A very long pause. I don't know what she felt in that moment, but I know what I felt watching it. Symmetry, because that question, "Do you have an appointment?" was the same question I used to ask myself every time I called home, unsure if I'd be received or tolerated. It was the question that hung in every ignored voicemail, every polite smile at Christmas, every time she said, "Not now." Nathan. Seth speaking. She didn't yell, didn't argue. She just stood there, like she was realizing this place, the one she sat in, dined in, was served in, wasn't just something I rented for a night. It was mine. Built, curated, directed, and now it had rules, standards, appointments. I watched as she finally nodded, adjusted her scarf and said, "Yes. Please." Check. Carla did. But I never came down. Not out of spite, out of structure. Because some doors don't close out of anger. They close because you finally have the right to decide when and if they open. We met in the Palm Room, a quiet, sunlit corner suite normally reserved for private interviews and press shoots. I chose it because the light came in soft and even, and because the acoustics didn't allow anyone to raise their voice without sounding foolish. She entered slowly. No heels this time. No pearls. Just a gray coat hands clasped, like she wasn't sure if she'd come for a conversation or a confession. I stood by the window watching the city wake up. "Thank you," she said. Voice small, stiff. For what? For seeing me. I didn't smile. I gestured to the armchair across from mine. 10 minutes. She sat carefully like she was afraid the furniture might reject her too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was earned. Finally, she said, "I didn't know you'd built all this." "I know. I didn't realize you didn't ask." That landed harder than I expected. Her eyes flickered something between shame and defense, but she didn't interrupt. I leaned back, kept my tone even. "You once laughed when I said I wanted to study hospitality. You said real men didn't fold napkins." "I was trying to protect you," she offered weakly. "From what, kindness, creativity? Or just anything that didn't look like Seth?" She looked down. "I sent flowers for 2 years," I continued. "Paid for Dad's therapy when no one would. Gave Lily her music camp without attaching my name. I know that now. I didn't do it for credit. I did it because I had room to give. Because I wanted to make something softer than the world I grew up in." She swallowed. "You think I was cruel?" I exhaled. Not sharply, just truthfully. "I think you were narrow. I think you mistook control for care. And I think you only understand love when it looks like obedience." She blinked hard. That one cut deep. But still, I wasn't cruel. I didn't raise my voice, didn't demand anything. She leaned forward slightly. "Is there a way to fix this?" I looked at her. Not as a son, not as the boy who once waited for her attention, but as a man who'd outgrown the need for it. "I don't know," I said. "That's not something I design for people anymore." She nodded. Didn't cry, didn't plead, just sat there. Small. Still. Like someone finally realizing they were never the main architect in the story they told themselves. I reached into the folio beside me, leather-bound, neatly stacked my version of photo albums, laid them on the table one by one. First, the bank statements. Disbursements routed through my LLC, the Newfield Trust. Her name was never on the paperwork, but the addresses, the timelines. They were unmistakable. Second, a printed confirmation from Lily's music camp. Under the sponsor name, Anonymous Patron. Note for talent that deserves to be heard. Third, the florist's subscription contract. Paid in full 24 months. Delivery instructions matched exactly with her preferences. No lilies always include seasonal greens. Handwritten note left blank. She reached for that one first. Her fingers hovered above the page like she was afraid it might burn. "This was you?" she asked. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. She looked through the rest. Her breathing slowed. At one point, she tried to say something, but the words got caught, like they didn't belong in her mouth anymore. I watched the realization settle in, not loud, not messy, just absolute. These weren't just gifts, they were reminders that while she turned away, I had stayed, quietly, unseen, but still offering. Because love, real love, doesn't always come with announcements. Sometimes it's packed in small boxes and sent through back doors just to keep dignity intact. And now, with the receipts laid out like evidence in a silent trial, she couldn't claim ignorance anymore. She looked up at me, eyes rimmed red but dry. I thought she whispered, then stopped. Exactly, she thought. She never asked. And in that stillness I gave her what she'd never given me, the grace to sit with it, without punishment, without performance, just the truth, laid bare and irreversible. She finally spoke. After a long silence, after the papers had settled and the truth had stopped echoing off the walls, she looked at me not as a mother defending her pride, but as someone standing in the rubble of her assumptions. Her voice was small. Careful. What do you want from me? Nathan? A younger version of me would have rushed in with a list. Apologies, acknowledgement, maybe even admiration. But that part of me was long gone. I looked her in the eye steady and said, nothing dramatic. She blinked. I don't need you to say you're proud. I don't need you to praise the building or the wine or the way the napkins were folded. She stayed quiet, listening. I paused, then let it land. I just don't want to be erased anymore. Her mouth parted slightly, but I held up a hand, not to silence her, but to finish. If silence is all you can give me, I'll take it. I've made peace with quiet. But don't rewrite me. Don't talk about your sons, and forget one was standing right here, holding it all together when no one noticed. She looked down, not in shame, in understanding. That was enough. I didn't need to win. I just needed not to disappear. It was a Monday morning, cool and crisp, when the shuttle bus pulled up in front of Langford. 15 students stepped out, nervous energy wrapped in backpacks and borrowed blazers. Most of them had never been inside a hotel like this. A few had never left their county. They were part of the Quiet Horizon Initiative, our scholarship program for first-generation college students in hospitality and design. I started it anonymously at first, but now I wanted them to know who they were walking behind. I greeted them just inside the lobby. Some of them looked surprised when they realized I wasn't just a manager or guest lecturer. "You're the owner?" One girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled. "I'm someone who used to clean rooms at a place that smelled like burnt coffee and mildew," I said. "So yeah, owner fits, but learner fits better." They laughed, nervously kindly. We started the tour. I didn't show them the luxury suites first. I showed them the staff kitchen. "This is where real hospitality lives," I said. "Not in chandeliers, but in the places no guest ever sees." One boy raised his hand. "Sir, were you always good at this? Or did people just believe in you?" I stopped, then told the truth. "No one believed in me at first," I said. "Not my teachers, not my family, not even myself some days. They were listening now, eyes locked in. But the work believed in me. The long nights, the design failures, the guests who didn't tip but smiled anyway. Every hard shift taught me something no compliment ever could." We passed through the library lounge. The girl from earlier, the one who asked if I was the owner, paused and whispered, "It's like the hotel is kind." I looked at her. "That's the idea." She glanced around. "It feels like someone built it for people like us." I nodded. Someone did. They didn't ask about my past. They didn't need to. Because when you stand in a space that was made by someone who remembers what it's like to be overlooked, you feel it. You feel possible. Before they left, one of the students hung back. He looked like me at 19, thin, tired, hopeful. He said quietly, "Thanks for showing us the inside. Most people only let us look through glass. I put a hand on his shoulder. Then break glass, son. Or, better yet, build doors. And in that moment, I understood all of it. The silence, the hurt. The work was never just for me. It was for them. So they'd know they didn't have to beg to be seen. They could build a place that sees others first. It came on a Thursday. I was sitting at my desk going over renovation plans for the Langford's rooftop expansion. There were paint samples on the windowsill, sketches on the tablet, and a cup of coffee gone cold. The notification chimed softly. Subject, no reply needed. It was from her. I stared at it for a moment, not because I was afraid I'd stopped bracing for her years ago, but something about those 4 words made me pause. I opened it. There were only 3 lines. Langford is beautiful, but your strength, your grace. My son is even more so. No salutation, no closing, just that. For a long moment, I didn't move. The screen stayed lit in the fading afternoon light, and I let the words sit there, not like fireworks, but like footprints across fresh snow. Not an apology, not a request, just recognition, the kind I'd stopped expecting. And because it came without fanfare, without the weight of guilt or the shield of pride, it landed. Soft. Quiet. True. I didn't write back. She asked me not to. Instead, I archived the message not to hide it, but to keep it. Tucked somewhere I could return to when the old voices got loud again. It didn't erase everything, didn't rewrite the years. But it added something. A new line at the bottom of the story. Not a period, just a breath. And sometimes that's enough. Some nights when the halls of Langford are quiet and the lights dim to that perfect amber hue, I walk alone. Not for inspection, not for protocol, just to listen, to remember. Because even now, even after the signatures, the soft openings, the praise, I still carry fragments of moments I never meant to keep. Like the time I was 16 bussing tables at that wedding reception. Seth was there, of course, polished, confident, already a junior rep at some firm he name-dropped every chance he got. Mom introduced him to the bride's parents like he was royalty. She mentioned his GPA, his internship, his future. She didn't mention I was working. She didn't even look at me when she took her champagne. I remember the bride's father handing me a wrinkled $5 bill and saying, "You'll get there someday, kid." Maybe. Then he laughed. I smiled back. But something in me folded. Cut to years later, my college apartment. No heat. Instant noodles 3 nights a week. I'd gotten my first A in hotel design theory, printed it out, and took a photo. I sent it to Mom. She replied 3 days later, "Make sure you have a backup plan. Hospitality's a fickle field." She never asked what the project was, never saw the render. I stayed up all night building. There were 1,000 small cuts like that, moments no one else would remember. But I did. I remember Seth calling my work service stuff, said I was wasting my brain learning how to carry plates. I remember showing up to Thanksgiving once excited to talk about a boutique chain I'd helped rebrand, only to be asked if I could help fold napkins for the kids' table. And now sometimes, when I run my fingers along the curved wood of the Langford lobby desk, designed by me, cut by hand, sealed with oil, I blended myself. I think about how none of them ever asked how long it took, what it meant, what it cost. But here it is. Real. Solid. Rooted. They don't have to remember. They don't even have to believe it. Because I do. And I've built a place that sees the ones like me, the ones who were invisible, until they made something that couldn't be ignored. Sometimes people ask me if it felt good, to watch them sit in the hotel they once said I'd never step foot in, to see their faces when the staff called me sir, when they realized whose world they were walking through. They ask if it was sweet. And sure, there was a flicker, a moment. A stillness where the old ache met the new truth and nodded like two old rivals who no longer had the will to fight. But that wasn't the point. It was never about revenge. Revenge is loud, messy. It needs an audience. What I wanted was quieter. I wanted to rebuild what had been dismissed. Not to make them watch, but to remind myself it was never theirs to define in the first place. I didn't need them to kneel. I needed to stand, on my own, without shaking. Because when someone erases you, the wound isn't just the absence, it's the echo. And healing isn't about returning to who you were before they doubted you. It's about becoming someone even their doubt couldn't reach. That's what Langford became for me. Not a monument, a sanctuary. Brick by brick, I stitched pieces of myself into every hallway, every light fixture, every quietly folded napkin. I built the place I once needed, then opened the doors wide enough for others who'd once been invisible too. So no, I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration, of voice, of self, of the boy I used to be who thought he had to earn his place by being perfect, or silent, or small. Now he walks beside me, quiet, steady. And when I turn the lights off at night when the world settles and the noise fades, I hear his voice again, not asking for permission, not begging to be seen, but finally whispering, "We made it." I didn't need to be feared. I didn't need to be praised. I just needed to be whole. Because in the end, I didn't need revenge. I needed restoration,